The house grew quiet, a different kind of quiet than the day held. During the sunlit hours, even when the children were at school and his wife was out running errands or working, there was a certain hum, a lingering echo of life. Perhaps it was the sunlight itself, streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, hinting at recent activity. But as dusk deepened, painting the sky in hues of lavender and deep indigo, and eventually surrendering to the vast, inky blackness of night, the quiet transformed. It became a profound silence, almost a physical presence that settled around David like a heavy blanket. The clatter of dinner dishes had long since faded. The excited giggles from bedtime stories had dwindled to soft sighs, and finally, the gentle rhythm of his children's breathing from their rooms was the only sound that pierced the stillness. He'd checked on them as always. A ritual. First, little Lily, her blonde curls fanned out on the pillow, a small, pink-nosed stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her tiny hand. Then Thomas, sprawled a bit more haphazardly, one leg sticking out from under his dinosaur-themed duvet, a faint smile playing on his lips, undoubtedly dreaming of adventures. David would stand there for a moment, just watching them, a warmth spreading through his chest, a fierce protectiveness that was both comforting and a little overwhelming. He'd smooth a stray lock of hair from Lily's forehead, or gently pull Thomas's duvet back over his exposed leg, small, silent gestures of love. Once he was sure they were deeply asleep, he would retreat, not to his own bed immediately, not yet. The night was still young for him, even if the rest of the world seemed to be slumbering. His wife, Sarah, usually went to bed earlier. Her days were packed, a whirlwind of managing the household, her part-time job, and the endless energy required to keep up with two young children. She'd often fall asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow, a soft, exhausted sigh escaping her lips. David understood. He truly did, but it left him, alone. In the quiet, stretching hours that lay between midnight and the first tentative chirps of the morning birds, he would make his way to the living room, sometimes the kitchen, drawn to the gentle glow of a lamp, a beacon in the encompassing darkness. The television would stay off. Music, too, felt like an intrusion, too loud, too demanding in this sacred stillness. Instead, he would pour himself a cup of herbal tea, or sometimes a small glass of whiskey, the amber liquid glinting softly in the low light. The warmth of the mug in his hands was a familiar comfort. He'd settle into his favorite armchair, the one by the window from where he could look out into the moonlit garden or sometimes just into the darkness. This was his time, his lonely nights. It wasn't a loneliness that stung with sorrow, not precisely. It was a quieter, more profound kind of solitude. A space for reflection, for processing the day, for untangling the knots of worries and responsibilities that accumulated like dust throughout the waking hours. He'd think about work, the looming deadlines, the challenging clients, the subtle political currents in the office. He'd mentally review his interactions, wondering if he'd handled that meeting well, if he'd been firm enough with his team, or perhaps too firm. The weight of being a provider, of ensuring the security and well-being of his family, was a constant undercurrent in his thoughts. It was a silent burden, one he carried willingly, even proudly, but a burden nonetheless. During the day, there was little time for such contemplation. The demands of immediate tasks, the needs of his children, the conversations with Sarah, all filled the hours, leaving no room for the deeper currents of his mind to surface. But in these quiet nights they rose. He'd think about his children, their futures, the world they would inherit. Would he be a good enough father? Had he taught them enough? Was he preparing them for the complexities of life? He'd remember a moment from the day, Lily's proud grin after drawing a wonky, brightly colored flower, Thomas's intense concentration as he built a precarious tower of blocks. These memories were precious, sparks of joy that flickered in the darkness, warming him. Yet even these joyful recollections brought with them a faint ache, a recognition of how quickly time was passing. They were growing up so fast. Soon, they wouldn't need him to read them bedtime stories or tuck them in or soothe their scraped knees. The thought was both liberating and a little terrifying. He'd also think about Sarah, his wife. Their relationship had evolved over the years, as all long-term relationships do. The passionate, breathless early days had given way to a deeper, more rooted love, one built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the incredible bond of raising a family together. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, he missed the ease of their early conversations, the spontaneous late-night talks that used to stretch for hours. Now their conversations were often practical, logistical. Who was picking up the kids? What was for dinner, the budget, the chores? The exhaustion of parenthood often meant that by the time they finally had a moment alone, they were both too tired to delve into anything truly deep. He loved her fiercely, profoundly. But sometimes in these lonely hours, a wistful sense of connection, a desire for that lost intimacy would wash over him. He wasn't sure if Sarah felt the same way, or if her exhaustion simply meant she welcomed the oblivion of sleep. He didn't want to burden her with his nocturnal musings. She carried enough. So he kept these thoughts to himself, companions in the quiet, reflective space he carved out each night. The moonlight would cast long shadows across the living room, transforming familiar objects into mysterious shapes. The old grandfather clock in the hall would tick with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic regularity, marking the slow, steady passage of time. Sometimes a floorboard would creak upstairs, or the house would settle with a soft sigh, making him pause, listen, wondering if one of the children had stirred. But usually it was just the house, breathing around him. He'd pick up a book sometimes, a novel, something to get lost in to escape the ceaseless hum of his own thoughts. But often he found it hard to focus. The words would blur, his mind wandering back to the day or forward to the challenges of tomorrow. He wasn't seeking distraction so much as a space to simply be, to exist in the quiet without demands. It was a form of self-care, perhaps, though he wouldn't have called it that. It was simply what he did, what he had come to do. These lonely nights weren't sad, not inherently. They were tinged with a certain melancholy, perhaps, a quiet recognition of the burdens and responsibilities of adulthood, of fatherhood. But they also held a profound sense of peace, a clarity that was difficult to achieve in the noise and busyness of the day. In the silence, he could hear himself think, could feel the pulse of his own being. He was David, not just Dad or Sarah's husband or the guy from accounting. He was just David, a man navigating his life, his dreams, his fears, under the vast, indifferent gaze of the night sky. He often wondered if other fathers experienced these same quiet, solitary hours. Did they also sit in the dark, contemplating the universe, their lives, their families, with only the soft glow of a lamp for company. It wasn't something men often talked about, these internal landscapes. Conversations between fathers often revolved around sports, work, the kids' achievements, practicalities. The deeper, more introspective aspects of fatherhood, the emotional weight, the silent sacrifices, these were often left unspoken, understood perhaps, but rarely articulated. He'd finish his tea or whiskey, the last sip warm on his tongue, and feel a sense of completion. The edges of his worries seemed a little softer, the complexities of life a little less daunting after he'd turned them over and over in his mind. The night, with its vastness and its quiet, had a way of putting things into perspective. It reminded him of the smallness of individual problems against the backdrop of eternity, and yet, paradoxically, of the immense importance of the small, precious moments of love and connection that made up his life. Finally, when his eyes began to feel heavy, and the first faint blush of pre-dawn light might just be hinting at the horizon, he would rise. He'd carefully turn off the lamp, plunging the living room back into complete darkness. The house would feel even quieter then, a sleeping giant. He'd make his way to his bedroom, slipping in beside Sarah, trying not to disturb her peaceful sleep. Her warmth next to him was a comfort, a quiet reassurance that he wasn't truly alone, even if these nights were his own solitary journey. He'd close his eyes, the silence of the house enveloping him, carrying him gently into sleep, preparing him for the joyful, demanding, noisy chaos that would erupt with the dawn. And he knew with a quiet certainty that he would do it all again, these lonely nights for his family, for the quiet clarity they brought, for the profound space they offered to simply be. Sometimes a sudden noise would jolt him awake in the dead of night, a creak from the floorboards above, a gust of wind rattling the window pane, or a distant siren wailing through the empty streets. His heart would quicken, instantly on alert. Fatherhood had installed a finely tuned sensor in him, always listening, always ready to respond to the slightest hint of a child's cry or a call for dad. But usually, it was nothing. Just the old house settling, or the world outside carrying on its indifferent journey. He'd lie there for a moment, listening to the silence, to the steady breathing of Sarah beside him, and the faint, rhythmic sounds from the children's rooms. A sense of peace would slowly return, but also that familiar tug of quiet solitude. These were the hours when memories often surfaced unbidden, like old photographs flipping open in his mind. He'd remember his own father, a man of few words, strong and steady, who also seemed to carry a silent weight. Had his father experienced these same lonely nights? Had he, too, sat in the quiet, contemplating his responsibilities, his hopes, his fears for his own growing family? David wondered if it was a generational rite of passage, this nocturnal vigil passed down from father to son, a silent testament to the unspoken depths of paternal love and duty. He wished he could ask his father now to share these unspoken thoughts, to connect on that deeper, more introspective level. But his father was gone now, and the opportunity for those conversations had passed, leaving a faint ache of regret. He'd sometimes pick up his phone, not to scroll aimlessly, but to look at pictures of the children. Lily's first day of school, her tiny backpack looking almost bigger than her. Thomas's triumphant grin after scoring his first goal in a youth soccer game, even if it was technically an own goal. Each image was a miniature burst of warmth, a reminder of the vibrant life that filled his days, even as the nights were often hushed. He treasured these moments, these visual anchors that grounded him in the beautiful, chaotic reality of his family life. They were a counterbalance to the quiet introspection, a reminder of the joy that fueled his efforts, that made the long hours and the silent worries worthwhile. The stillness of the house in these small hours was also a canvas for contemplation about his own journey. He'd traced the path his life had taken, the choices he'd made, the roads not taken. Had he pursued his early dreams with enough conviction? Had he seized every opportunity? The questions were not tinged with bitter regret, but rather with a gentle curiosity, a sense of evaluating the tapestry of his existence. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that becoming a father was the most profound and transformative experience of his life. It had reshaped his priorities, redefined his purpose, and filled his heart with a love he hadn't known was possible. And even if it meant these lonely nights, these solitary vigils, it was a trade he would make 1,000 times over. Sometimes, if a particular thought or problem was weighing heavily on him, he'd get up and walk around the house. The soft carpet under his bare feet, the familiar scent of home, a mixture of lingering dinner smells, clean laundry, and the faint, sweet scent of children. He'd walk from room to room, a silent guardian moving through his domain. He'd pause at the children's doors again just to listen, to ensure their continued peaceful slumber. The soft, even breaths were a lullaby to his soul. It was a tangible manifestation of his protection, his constant watchfulness, even in sleep. He was the anchor in the night, the steady presence. And in that role, he found a quiet strength. It wasn't about being seen or acknowledged in those moments. It was about the silent act of being present, of holding the space, of ensuring the safety and comfort of his loved ones. It was a form of love that didn't need words or grand gestures, but was expressed in the quiet dedication of his nocturnal solitude. The moon outside would often be his only witness, sometimes a full, luminous orb, casting a silvery glow over everything, making the garden look ethereal and otherworldly. Other times, a sliver, a shy crescent peeking through the clouds, or completely absent, leaving the sky in profound darkness punctuated by the distant glitter of stars. He found a strange companionship in the moon, a silent observer of the lonely nights, of the unspoken thoughts of countless individuals across the globe, each navigating their own quiet solitude. The vastness of the cosmos had a way of humbling him, of making his worries seem smaller, yet simultaneously amplifying the preciousness of the human connections he held so dear. He often wondered what the children dreamt of. Were their dreams as vivid and boundless as their waking imaginations? Did Lily fly with fairies through enchanted forests? Did Thomas battle dragons and explore uncharted planets? He hoped their dreams were filled with wonder and joy, a reflection of the security and love they felt in their waking lives. He felt a deep responsibility to nurture that sense of wonder, to protect their innocence for as long as he could, knowing that the world outside would eventually demand its share of their idealism. As the first faint hues of dawn began to paint the sky, a soft, ethereal gray that gradually lightened to pink and gold, a different kind of energy would stir within him. The quiet introspection of the night would slowly recede, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and readiness for the day ahead. He'd stretch, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from hours of sitting, and sometimes a faint ache in his heart from the emotional journey he'd taken. But he also felt a subtle rejuvenation, a cleansing of the mind that these solitary hours provided. He'd make his way to the kitchen, perhaps start the coffee maker, the gurgle and hiss of the machine a welcome sound, signaling the gradual awakening of the house. Soon, there would be the rustle of sheets from the children's rooms, a sleepy yawn, a tentative call of Dad. And then the silence would shatter, replaced by the beautiful, vibrant symphony of family life. The laughter, the small squabbles, the endless questions, the joyful noise that filled every corner of their home. And as he embraced the chaos, the loving demands of his family, he would carry with him the quiet strength and clarity he had found in the lonely nights, a secret wellspring of resilience and love, deep within his father's heart. He often felt like the silent keeper of the family's dreams, not just the dreams of his children for their future, but also the dreams for the family as a whole, for their well-being, their happiness, their growth. These nights were a kind of invisible work, a mental and emotional labor that went unnoticed by the world, and often even by his own family. But it was essential work, he felt. It was where he processed the day's events, where he mentally prepared for tomorrow, where he nurtured the roots of his unwavering commitment to his wife and children. He was, in a sense, tending to the emotional garden of his family during these quiet hours, pulling out the weeds of worry, strengthening the soil of his love, and envisioning the blossoms of their future. He'd recall conversations with other fathers, fleeting moments where a hint of shared experience would surface. A colleague once mentioned how he loved the peace after the kids are asleep, with a knowing look that suggested a deeper understanding. Another friend had confessed to staying up late, just to have some quiet time to think. These small acknowledgments were like whispered confirmations in the vast silence, reminding him that he wasn't entirely alone in this particular journey. There was an unspoken fraternity of fathers, all navigating their own versions of these lonely nights, each carrying their silent burdens and finding their quiet strength. Sometimes he'd find himself thinking about his own childhood, seeing echoes of his own experiences in Lily and Thomas. Their boundless energy, their innocent questions, their fierce emotions, they were all familiar, yet also uniquely their own. He wanted to be the father his children needed, a steady presence, a guiding hand, a loving embrace. He wanted to equip them with resilience, with kindness, with the courage to face the world. And in the quiet of the night, he'd mentally rehearse conversations, imagine scenarios, trying to anticipate how best to guide them through the inevitable challenges life would present. The concept of time itself seemed to stretch and warp during these nocturnal hours. An hour could feel like an eternity, filled with sprawling thoughts and deep introspection. Other times, the clock would race forward, and suddenly, the first hint of dawn would be peeking through the curtains, signaling the impending end of his solitary vigil. He cherished these moments, this distinct temporal space that felt separate from the hurried pace of the day. It was a pocket of existence carved out just for him, a sacred interval in the relentless march of time. He learned to appreciate the small comforts of these nights, the satisfying click of the kettle boiling water for his tea, the soft crackle of a log in the fireplace if it was cold enough for a fire, the weighty feel of a favorite book in his hands, even if he wasn't actively reading it. These sensory details anchored him, made the solitude feel less abstract and more grounded, more real. They were tiny rituals that marked the passage of his lonely nights, small anchors in the vast ocean of his thoughts. As he closed his eyes, finally drifting into sleep, he carried with him the echo of the night's quietude, a gentle hum that would resonate even through the coming day's joyful noise. He was ready for the morning, ready for the embraces, the demands, the laughter, the love. He was a father and he was ready. And he knew with a deep and quiet certainty that these lonely nights, these private journeys of the heart and mind, were an essential part of who he was, a silent strength that fueled his love and guided his way. The sun would rise soon, painting the world in vibrant hues, and the house would awaken with the joyous cacophony of his family. But for now, just for a little while longer, the quiet reigned and David, the father, would rest, holding the peace of the lonely night close to his heart. He'd sometimes find himself replaying conversations from the day, not necessarily with regret, but with a desire to understand, to analyze. Had he truly listened to Lily when she tried to explain the intricate plot of her make-believe game? Had he given Thomas his full attention when he was recounting the day's adventures at school? In the hurried pace of life, it was easy to get distracted, to nod absently while thinking about the next task. The quiet nights offered a chance to consciously slow down, to mentally re-engage with those moments, to truly hear what had been said, and perhaps more importantly, what had been unsaid. This reflective process wasn't about self-criticism, but about a gentle striving to be a more present, more attuned father, a better listener, a more empathetic guide for his children. The house, stripped of its daytime sounds and activities, took on a different character at night. It became more than just a structure of wood and brick. It felt like a living entity, breathing around him, holding the silent stories of its inhabitants. Each creak, each subtle shift in the floorboards seemed to whisper tales of laughter and tears, of dreams and fears that had unfolded within its walls. He was a part of that story, an integral thread in the tapestry of their family home, and in these quiet hours he felt that connection most profoundly. He was the anchor, the one who watched over the sleeping house, ensuring its safety, its peace. He often thought about the future, not just his children, but his own and Sarah's as a couple. What would their lives look like when the children were grown and had left the nest? Would the house feel too empty then, the silence too vast? Would they find new ways to connect, to fill the space that the children's vibrant presence now occupied? The thought brought a mix of wistfulness and anticipation. It was a reminder that life was a continuous journey of evolution, of letting go and embracing new chapters. And these lonely nights were, in a way, a preparation for those future silences, a gentle training for a different kind of quiet. The weight of being a role model was another silent companion during these nocturnal reflections. His children watched him, absorbed his every action, his every reaction. He was their first hero, their first teacher of how to navigate the world. This responsibility was immense, humbling. He wanted to embody qualities of integrity, kindness, resilience, and love. He wanted them to see him as a strong yet gentle presence in their lives. And so, in the quiet of the night, he'd often find himself scrutinizing his own behavior, gently correcting his course, striving to be the best version of himself, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the impressionable young eyes that looked up to him. He sometimes wondered if Sarah ever felt a similar sense of solitary reflection. Her days were so filled with the tangible tasks of mothering and managing, perhaps her mind simply craved the oblivion of sleep. He didn't resent her for it, he understood. Her love and dedication were evident in every aspect of their family life. It was just a different way of processing, a different rhythm of being. And his rhythm, it seemed, was attuned to the quiet pulse of the night. The books he read during these hours were often nonfiction, historical accounts, philosophical musings, or even scientific explorations. He found a certain comfort in expanding his mind, in learning something new. It was a way to nurture his own intellectual curiosity, which often took a backseat during the demanding hours of the day. The act of learning, of engaging with complex ideas, felt like a quiet rebellion against the mundane, a way to keep his own spirit alive and growing, even as he poured so much of himself into his family. He recognized that these lonely nights were, in a way, a gift, a sacred space for self-discovery, for deep connection with his own inner landscape. In a world that constantly demanded external focus, outward projection, and endless doing, these nights offered a precious opportunity for inward retreat, for quiet being. They were the crucible where his identity as a father was forged, refined, and strengthened, away from the watchful eyes and demands of the day. And as the darkness outside began to thin, giving way to the gentle, almost imperceptible hint of dawn, he would feel a shift within him. The deep introspection would slowly yield to a renewed sense of anticipation. The silent wisdom gathered in the night would settle deep within his being, forming a quiet reservoir of strength and understanding. He would rise from his armchair, feeling the subtle stiffness in his limbs, but also a profound sense of calm. He'd stretch, breathe deeply, and prepare for the day. He knew that the moment the first child stirred, the moment Lily's sweet voice called for him, or Thomas's energetic thud hit the floor, the quiet would shatter. And he would embrace that glorious noise, that beautiful chaos, with an open heart. He would step back into his role as dad, ready to guide, to nurture, to love. But he would carry with him the secret strength of his lonely nights, the silent knowledge of the man who watched over them, who thought deeply, who loved profoundly in the quiet, hushed hours when the rest of the world slept. And he wouldn't trade those nights, those precious moments of solitary reflection, for anything. They were his, and they made him the father he was. He was the silent guardian of his household, the quiet sentinel of sleep, a father whose love was so vast it stretched beyond the daylight hours, encompassing the stillness of the night as well. The air itself seemed different in these hours, cooler, crisper, carrying the scent of damp earth or distant wood smoke. It was a sensory world that belonged to the night, distinct from the warmth and brightness of the day. He often found a certain poetry in this sensory shift, a quiet beauty that appealed to his introspective nature. The stars, if visible, seemed to burn with a more intense fire, their distant light a profound reminder of the vastness of the universe and the small, precious corner of it that he called home. He would sometimes write in a journal during these hours, not elaborate entries but brief notes, fragments of thoughts, insights that had surfaced from the deep well of his nocturnal musings. It was a way to capture the fleeting wisdom of the night, to give tangible form to the abstract currents of his mind. These pages were a private record, a dialogue with himself, a testament to the quiet work of his soul. They were filled with the joys and anxieties of fatherhood, the subtle shifts in his own understanding of life, the hopes he held for his children, and the quiet love that underscored everything. The exhaustion that often settled upon him in the late hours was a peculiar kind. It wasn't the bone-deep weariness of physical labor, but a mental and emotional fatigue that came from hours of intense thought, of carrying the weight of his responsibilities in the quiet of the night. Yet it was a satisfying exhaustion, one that indicated a journey completed, a mental landscape traversed. It was the tiredness of a mind well worked, a heart well explored. He learned to recognize the subtle cues of the approaching dawn, even before the light became visible. A faint change in the texture of the darkness outside the window, a subtle shift in the sounds of the night, perhaps the distant call of an early bird, a tiny herald of the coming day. These were the signals that gently nudged him towards the transition, from the quiet contemplative state of the night father to the active, engaged role of the day father. It was a seamless flow, a natural progression, a cycle he had come to embrace as an essential part of his life. The silence of the night was not empty but full of thoughts, full of emotions, full of the unseen currents of life. It was a vibrant, living silence, a space where his soul could breathe, could expand, could simply be. And in that fullness, he found a profound sense of connection, not just to himself, but to the deeper rhythms of life, to the unspoken experiences of all who navigated the journey of parenthood, and to the vast, mysterious universe that held them all. He was a small part of a much larger story, and in these lonely nights, he felt that connection most keenly, most intimately. He would sometimes leave a small light on for Sarah, a soft bedside lamp, just in case she stirred in the night. It was a small, silent gesture of care, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared journey, even if their paths through the night were different. It was a reminder that even in his solitude, his thoughts were always intertwined with hers, with theirs as a family. And then, as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the gaps in the curtains, painting the edges of the room with a soft, golden glow, he would finally rise, stretch, and prepare to re-enter the world of noise, light, and joyful demands. He would carry the quiet strength of his lonely nights into the day, a silent anchor in the beautiful chaos, a father deeply rooted in love, illuminated by the wisdom found in the stillness. He was ready for whatever the day might bring, knowing that he had faced the night, and in its quiet embrace had found a deeper understanding of himself and of the profound privilege of being a father. He was a man made stronger by his solitude, a guardian made wiser by the watch, always ready to protect, to nurture, and to love, carrying the silent weight and the quiet joy of fatherhood in his every step.